It's a challenging time to be a teacher. We don't get paid a lot, the days can be long and exhausting, demands from students, parents, admins, and districts can be intense. There is always room for improvement, and there is always more to do. There are always new procedures to learn, new programs to run, new strategies to master. But it's when our fire burns the lowest that we remember our purpose. We teach because we're resilient. We teach because we're problem solvers. We teach because investing in kids is one of the highest callings we can imagine. We teach because we know that the classroom can be a place of magic and possibility. We teach because we have an unquenchable fire for learning and a passion to share it. We teach because our colleagues are some of the best human beings we will ever meet. We teach because we have an opportunity to influence the global citizens that will make this world a better place. If you're still on fire for learning and growth, join the Teachers on Fire Roundtable for conversations that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your practice. You'll hear from real people and real educators with real solutions, not make-believe perfection, but ideas, inspiration, and a path toward change and transformation in K-12 education today. My name is Tim Cavey. I'm an 8th grade teacher, assistant principal, and the host of the Teachers on Fire podcast. I'm inviting you to join us at the Teachers on Fire Roundtable. Because you matter, your voice is important, and we are all better together. Welcome back, Teachers on Fire, to another conversation that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. I am so excited to welcome into the studio with me this morning a father, husband, principal, consultant, author, speaker, and podcaster. Welcome to the show, Charles Williams. If 1 is burnout and 5 is on fire, how are you feeling this morning?
Well, Tim, you've helped me get to number 4 this morning. I won't say I'm at 5 yet. It's still early, okay. But I got to sleep in. I slept in until 6 o'clock this morning. Nice. Usually it's 3:30, so I got some rest. I'm here connecting with you, talking about education. So what's not to like?
Right. It's just the best way to start a weekend. That's what I think too. Thank you for joining me in my my geekdom. We are education geeks, and we don't apologize for it. Well, thank you for joining me live, joining both of us live this morning in the audience or watching on the replay. If you are here, let us know where you're joining from. Where are you watching from, and where would you rate yourself from 1 to 5? Where are you on that scale of 1 being burnout? Hopefully you're not a 1, and 5 being on fire. We've got on Facebook, Inga checking in from Georgia. We've got Shannon Schinkel, faithful supporter of the show. Thank you so much, Shannon. Coming in from Prince George, feeling about a 4 I think likely at the end of her spring break. And back to Inga, she's saying that gets 4 thumbs. 4 thumbs this morning. Well, that's not bad. We'll take it. Well, Charles, let's jump right into it. You recently co-authored this book, Inside the Principal's Office, A Leadership Guide to Inspire Reflection and Growth. Love that subtitle. How do you foster a culture of reflection and growth in your learning community?
So Tim, it's all about creating opportunities, right? I think a lot of times we're waiting for a chance to, but instead of just waiting and saying, oh, I have some time now, like you have to be intentional about creating those opportunities for both reflection and for growth, right? Reflection often leads to growth, and growth gives you an opportunity to reflect. And so, for example, within my staff, every single Wednesday, we get together as a staff and we do a variety of things. This past week, it was a little bit of both. We were reflecting on discourse 1 and discourse 2. Like, how do we show up in spaces, and how do we impact our situations, our settings, as we're seeing all of the different outcomes in our spaces? We talk a lot about just in these spaces, the learning community is much larger. So, yesterday, I just released one of my pause to ponder moments on my podcast. It's just literally me sitting down and speaking my thoughts into the ether. My good friends from the staff room, Che and Pav, you know them very well. They mentioned a while ago that the podcast oftentimes is not for everybody else, but it's an opportunity for you to chronicle your own learning journey. And that's really what it's become. I just throw my thoughts out there. Some people like to do a lot of writing. Some people do this and do that. They'll meditate and things. I like to speak. That's how I communicate my thoughts. And so there's a variety of ways, but regardless of what they are, you have to be intentional. I'm trying to get better. I know a few episodes ago on Inside the Principal's Office, we talked about journaling. And one of my staff members delivered a journal to my desk with some fresh pens. I was so excited. And I was like, I'm going to journal every day. And then, like principalship happens. And I was like, okay, I'll journal every week. And I started just saying, instead of saying I have to journal, like I'm going to find opportunity. I'm going to make that time to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to block this time out and just do that. Because if I'm hoping to do it every day or I'm hoping to do it every week, it's never going to happen because it's just another thing on my to-do list. But if I carve out that time, then I can do it. So my journal is starting to get filled in. Finally.
That's so true. It's got to be on the calendar. It's got to be sort of a no negotiation with yourself kind of. I maybe don't want to use the word obligation, but you do need to think of it or take it seriously enough that it actually happens and you're not just waiting to be in the mood to do it. Well, I appreciate that you want to do it with pen and paper. I mean, you're going old school, and I know there are some good kinesthetic things going on there when you do write by hand, but I am such a fan of the blogging, and I think that's also a great way. I know you've done some of that as well, but also a great way to share your learning and reflection on the regular. So a big fan of that. A couple more comments coming in. We've got Tim Stevenson on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us, Tim, all the way from Langley. He knows that's just a few blocks from my house, so really not too far at all, but great to have you here. I know Tim just came back from Mexico, so great to have you on the show this morning. I can't help but wonder, Charles, before we move on, when you think about that culture of reflection and growth, love everything that you said and what you described happening with your staff. Do your colleagues, do your staff members listen to your podcasts at all? Do you ever get conversations coming from that?
Yeah, so they're starting to I'm extremely humble. I don't like to brag. I don't like to talk. So when they started finding out, they were like, wait, you have a podcast? Wait, you have a book? And I was like, yeah. And so, but they're starting to. And so, like the show that I do on Saturdays, they're more and more are starting to jump in and to watch that. And I think it's really important because it reinforces the things that I'm talking to them about in school. It's not just Principal Williams Charles is just saying these crazy things. Like, no, this is something I believe. And so when you see me talking about it and sharing about it in other spaces, it's reinforcing that. But on the other side, I talk about them a lot. So I think it's also helpful for them to say, like, he always tells us in our meetings, like he talks about, but here he is in these public platforms talking about us, talking about the work that we're doing in these spaces. And so it's not just me anymore. It's us, right? This is the work that we are doing, which is something I truly believe in. And so I think it just reinforces the type of leader I am. And they're like, yeah, not like maybe if we didn't always believe you, now we know because you're telling everybody the same things that you're telling us.
Right. I sort of wondered that I want to say a few months ago, I heard an episode where you were pretty authentic, pretty vulnerable. And what I mean by that is you were talking about here is the X, Y, and Z that I'm happy to do for my team, for my teachers. Mm-hmm. But here's what I need from you in return. Yeah. And I thought, ooh, if some of his staff is listening here, this is pretty real. This is pretty immediate. And, I could just sort of hear you right there in your faculty meeting. I'm sure it's the same exact message. Mm-hmm. Well, on a similar theme, you write to principals in the book that you are the lead learner in your building, and it is important that you are actively involved every day. What can that look like, and what does that not look like, that idea of modeling the lead learning?
Yeah, so as a great example, so I just took my staff on the ASCD conference, was here in Chicago this past weekend. And so I took my staff. Now, I'm always going to conferences because I really, really enjoy being like my wife's like, you're the only person who like looks forward to it. But I'm like, I'm a nerd, right? We're edgy nerds. I love to learn and grow. And so I've been inviting staff and they're like, I really got to give up a weekend. I really got to do this. But this time I had 7 staff members say, no, we want to go with you. So I said, come on, like, let's make this thing happen. And they were in awe. They're like, wait, this is what you do? Yeah. And so I was modeling for them, like, this is how we learn and grow individually, but this is then how we gain those skills and we could give back to our school, and our school gets even better. And so now they're already looking forward to the next one. They're like, next year it's in Denver. Do we get to go to Denver? I was like, well, let me work on those grants. When it's here in our backyard, it's a little easier.
Yeah.
But it's constantly modeling and sharing with them. And so again, having these platforms and inviting them into those spaces, they can see that. I'm extremely transparent. I'm extremely vulnerable, where I just open up and I talk about my own, journeys, and they see that constantly. I just shared in the podcast that came out yesterday. On Wednesday, when I met with my staff, I shared with them. I said, hey, one of you brought a concern to me. I didn't realize that. I launched into figuring out what are some solutions to this thing. Like, it's just what we do. And so it's like, I want to model for you what I want to see, in the same way that I ask for you to model for your students, right? It's the same exact thing. We don't stop being teachers, even though we may be a principal, because now we're just the lead learner. We are leading teachers. We're leading learners. So I have to be a role model in that capacity.
I love it, and I think it's so important for us to, as administrators, to be hungry and to demonstrate that and to live that out. It's not something that we can just do in the privacy of our corner or our office. Our teams need to see that. Because they take their cues from us and from what we see. Do you ever share, I'm sure you do, almost a no-brainer, but do you share your reading with your team sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Anything that I happen to be reading. So right now, I'm part of a PLC, and we're reading Grading for Equity. So I saw somebody pop in Beyond Report Cards. I'm like, I'm going to try to connect with you. But it's like, again, this is something that I'm reading, and I share it out with them. And then not only do I share, but I'm like, hey, do you guys want to do like a book study? Do you want to sit down and have a reading? And so just on top of that, something that I do every quarter, I give my staff a book. And so we don't necessarily have to do a book study, but I'm encouraging them stay current. And so like I've given them the Teach Like a Pirate. I've given them the Cult of Pedagogy. We did the How to Be an Anti-Racist, because this is the work that we're doing in our spaces. So let's make sure that we're staying current on these things. And so every quarter I'm giving them a book and saying, hey, read this. And if you want, we'll create a book study, because I'm not into forcing people to learn and grow. Because then, you just have people are like, I don't want to do this. And it's not quality. It's not, what is the word I'm looking for? Authentic, right? So instead I say, hey, look, here's a resource. Let's sit down. Let's dive deep, because I'm going to do it anyway. So if you want to be part of that, I would love to have other individuals, because if not, I'm going to be doing it. And so that's just, again, always reading, always learning, always growing.
So good. Shannon is here, and she noticed your comment there and says, I love Grading for Equity. Thank you for the shout out. And yes, tremendous Facebook group over there. If you are joining us live or on the replay, make sure you check out Beyond Report Cards on Facebook if you are interested in reimagining assessment in your learning community. Tim says, I want to teach at your school. Yes.
Come on, Tim. As long as you take me to Mexico with you, then we're good.
That's right. Well, thank you so much to our live and replay audience for joining us. If you're enjoying the conversation so far, smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe wherever you are viewing. Your support is appreciated. Charles, you host as we've already talked about, you host the Counter Narrative podcast, and I've got to say your sound is always fantastic. Love listening to you, and just the way that, as you mentioned, you sort of process many of your own thoughts. Sometimes interviews, sometimes those monologues. Share about one recent episode or topic that continues to resonate for you, maybe one that we haven't discussed so far.
Yeah, so one that really I still talk about, and it's actually kind of serving as a momentum for a project that I'm trying to launch. It was called Remember the Alamo. So I was down in Tassa, right? Yet another conference in February, presenting on the book, actually. So we were down there and we were presenting our book. And so my wife and I, we are nerds. We're history nerds. And so like the Alamo is an hour away. So my wife, she was like, we have to go see the Alamo. Now my wife, she's from Guadalajara. And so we go, right? We're like, okay, let's look into it. But of course, we always look at things through multiple lenses. We're like, what is the lens that is traditionally taught in our schools? but what is that other story, right? What is the other narrative that is often suppressed or not told? And so, she had a lot of history just from her own personal experiences as a Mexican American. Like,
Yeah.
there's a whole other side to this story.
Right.
While we were there, we popped into the San Antonio. I can never. It's SACAM. I can never remember exactly. But while we were there, I learned that the Alamo also served as a site where they sold slaves,
Mm.
and I was like, wait a minute, like what? Like none of that was mentioned when we were at the Alamo. I've never even thought about those things. And
Yeah.
so it's really just uncovering, sometimes it's like those hidden histories. And so that's one that resonates with me because I'm like, if that is one story, right? I'm a grown, in the podcast episode, I was angry because I'm like, how am I a grown man and I'm just learning this? So what I would love to do is to launch into kind of these hidden histories. What are the other stories that are often told? Because we know about the quote heroes, the David Bowie and Crockett, but there's other stories. So what else is like that, in our country or beyond to say there's a whole other story here. Let's talk about that. And I know it's uncomfortable because it's not the narrative that we often talk about. It exposes some dirty secrets of our past, but I think really the only way that we're going to truly move forward is you have to confront those things. You have to accept them, recognize them, and say, yeah, this is what we did, but here's how we move forward. And so that's just something that I'm really figuring out. How can I launch this and explore those things, right? I get really jealous of all those people on Netflix that get to travel the world. Like, that's your job. Like, I want that
Yeah.
job. So I'm trying to put those together.
Yeah. So good. Yeah. I mean, I think often about the sort of great man mythology we've built around presidents and past leaders and certain stories in our history. And this is what shapes and defines us. And this is true of so many cultures around the planet, but we have to unpack these
Hmm.
stories and these myths sometimes and say, "Oh, ouch, there is more going on here." Shifting gears, and we will come back to diversity, equity, and inclusion in a moment, but you tweet openly rather about the dangers of perfectionism, insecurities, and imposter syndrome in the life and work of an education leader. So thinking of both the administrators and teachers on fire who are taking that leadership step, how do you personally confront these challenges?
That this was a hard one for a long time. But I think in my co-host Michael McWilliams, he's really kind of gave me the wordage for this is that I didn't know my why. I didn't have my purpose in place. I couldn't verbalize that. So I always felt like I was trying to prove myself. And really what I was trying to do is try to prove myself to me, because I was always worried about what everybody else thought about me. When I showed up in the spaces, oftentimes, I was one of the youngest people in those spaces, right? I know people are always, I'm not even 40 yet. So I do all of these things and they're looking at me like, who are you? Who are you to be in this space telling us these things? So I just had to figure out what is my purpose? Why am I doing this work and sit in that? Because once I was able to figure that out, it really helped. Not to say that it cancels out those feelings of the insecurities and imposter syndrome, but it gives me a place to ground myself when those doubts come rushing in, which they do come rushing in. It's no, this is what I'm designed to do. And as long as you have that place, that you can remain steadfast, you'll be able to battle and push back against those. But if you don't have your feet set, right? If you're not solid, yeah, you're going to be buffeted around and you're going to feel overwhelmed and you're going to, feel burnt out and you're going to walk away. You're going to give up because you never grounded yourself. But that's where it has to start. Who are you? Why are you doing this work? What is your purpose? And once you know that, then you're okay.
Is that something that you have ever written out and formalized, Charles?
Yeah. So Brandon Beck, a good friend,
Yeah.
fellow code breaker, in his book, he actually gave like a format, like to say what is your purpose. And I'm glad I stumbled across it. I looked at it, I read, and so I sat there for a while and kept
Hmm.
working on my own purpose. And then I've even again, what I do is I took that to my staff and I
Hmm.
asked, why are we here? Why are we doing this work? And so I made them do that, right? Then we put it up on their walls, like this is why you come to school each and every single day. And we even did the somebody Tara out in Pennsylvania as well, she did this like uh, reason for the season. And so it was like, what is my purpose? What is my reason? So we did the same thing with ornaments. And they're like, wait, didn't we already do our mission and our purpose? Like, yeah, but we have to continuously verbalize it. We have to continuously um, uh, ground ourselves in that work. And so that, I just think it's super important. And so again, anybody doing this work, make sure that you figure out what is your, either go and buy Brandon's book, right, and then follow that format. uh, but not that that's the only good thing in the book. It's a great book. But figure out who it is, and just remind yourself each and every single day, why am I here? Because you're going to have those days where it's hard. Why am I doing this work? Right? We talked about the Great Resignation on a recent episode of ITPO, and it's like, yeah, when you're feeling that, when you're doubting, ground yourself. Yeah, it's not always going to be easy, but this is why. This is why I'm doing this work.
Yeah, I love it. It's something I've talked about many times, writing that personal mission statement. I don't think I've actually done it, and maybe that needs to be a blog post at some point. But
Yeah.
sort of like here's my manifesto, here's who I am. Maybe even a little bit of commentary on here are some of what I think are my strengths, some of my weaknesses, areas of growth. Here's what I'm all about. And when you have that clarity and you're not being buffeted by critique or by whatever, those things that cause the doubts, that's something that you can go back to over time. So I envy you, and I think that's something I need to do as well. Brian had a good comment here. Let me go back to it. He said, being present where you are can help you with confidence in the face of perfectionism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, being present in the moment. Well, we've talked a little bit, Charles, about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm always struck by the ways that you approach these topics in such a, maybe it's just your voice, your smooth voice on the podcast, but it's like you've got this I don't know, this grace, this manner about you that just makes it really comforting, and it brings the temperature of the conversation right down. But you still, I wrote here, you're gently provocative. You push those buttons and sort of prompt the thinking a little bit. What are your thoughts on how can educators seeking to bring positive culture change do so in ways that also build bridges in a time when we have so much fighting across school boards and districts?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about building allyship across differences. And so I think one of the things that we have to realize that when we're coming into these spaces is that both parties always think that they're right. And it's not about winning. It's not about being right. It's about saying, these are my perceptions. This is how I am feeling. This is how this is impacting me. And in both having those conversations and really listening to each other. Because if you come into that space to say, I'm here to fight, I'm here to win, I'm only here to get my points across and not listen to anything else, you're never going to build a bridge, because the other person is going to feel attacked and doing the exact same thing. And so it's not about saying, okay, fine, I'm going to compromise, or I'm going to, what is the word I'm looking for? Because there are people who feel like, no, I shouldn't have to give up my beliefs. And it's not about giving up your beliefs, but it's about truly listening to what the other person is saying. A lot of times when we're facing issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, it's coming from a place because I don't know any different, right? That's really the truth here. I was just actually talking to my wife this morning about pronouns and the challenge that we're having in our school. We just did a survey, and what launched it was that my students, one of the questions asked about, are students bullied in your school because of sexual or gender orientation? And the kids were appalled. Who would do that? That's ridiculous, right? And I was proud. I was like, yes, like it's working. Everything that I'm trying to do, because they were just like, that is not an okay thing to do. But when I have that same exact conversation with adults, they struggle. Well, why do I have to refer to you by a different pronoun? Why do I have to do that? And it's because I don't know. I don't have that experience. And so I'm speaking from the place that I understand and I know. So the question first is, are you engaging with somebody who's really open to having a conversation and changing? That's the primary thing. Because there are people out there that just want to fight, that they just want their voice heard. They just want to throw don't deal with those individuals, because you're not going to make any sort of progress. But if two people come together who truly want to learn and grow, both parties can do that. As the equity warrior, you could better understand where that person's coming from to say, oh, That makes sense. And it helps you figure out, how do I approach this work so that way you better understand it, that way you better embrace it and accept it, instead of just coming full force and ramming in. And so I talk a lot about my growing up. I have this whole keynote that I do now that talks about the issue of color blindness. Right, I grew up right raised by my grandparents who were white, and they stripped away the identity of being a black person because they were terrified of what that meant in America. And so as I grew older, I started figuring out what that meant. Of course, sometimes by choice, sometimes not by choice.
Yeah.
And it gave me a nice dual perspective. So when I come into these spaces, I'm like, I get it. I get where you're coming from on both sides. And so it really helps you to navigate that. But I think that is the key to building bridges, is to say, let me better understand where you're coming from, how you're showing up, and allow me to do it, so that way we could come to an understanding and grow together. It's not about winning. It's not. That's the thing I tell people all the time. Like, it's not about winning. It's not about being right. It's about learning and growing and making situations better, because that's what we're trying to do.
So many good things there. Great reminders. Brian, sort of picking up on what you're saying there, ask for help. First of all, just asking the questions, right, Charles?
Yeah.
Being curious, having that posture of humility to say, maybe there are things in your perspective that I don't understand. And Brian attaches the growth mindset to this as well. Absolutely. That's something we need to bring. So asking questions, remaining humble. And you talked about the I messages. People can argue with your politics. They can't really argue with your experience, your personal lived experience, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important part. All right, well, as we start to wind down, Charles, I'm going to put you on the spot here with a few rapid fire questions, or you can take them in different directions if you so choose. But first of all, thinking of wellness and self-care, what is one app, routine, or daily practice that gives you clarity and rekindles your fire on the daily?
Yeah, so podcast, Castbox. I have an 1.5-hour commute every single day, one direction, not round trip, one way. And so lots of time to listen to different podcasts. And so every day going into work, gets me grounded to do this work. So Castbox is my preferred platform.
Okay, yeah, it's been a while since I've used Castbox. Have you tried Overcast?
You know what? I found something and I'm just like, cool, this works. I didn't
Fair enough. Charles, we laughed off air about this question, but whose voices are inspiring you right now? Which authors, speakers, or creators are lighting your fire for learning? And maybe, as I said earlier, maybe it should just be one, but you decide.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not going to start naming names and then having people feel left out. But I'll go to the one, because, again, at this conference, I sat in Principal Kafele's session, Baruni Kafele. So powerful. And I will be honest, I called my wife right after, because I was vibrating. His energy, just reignited me. Plus, he was promoting the work that I'm doing. He was encouraging people to go and buy the book. That helped. But it was just the fact that it's like he is authentic and he is passionate, and it's hard not to get excited when you're listening to him. So thank you, Kafele.
That man can preach, and if you are digging this format, this live stream conversation format, make sure you check out his channel. He is really the king, isn't he, Charles? In this space,
he is amazing.
He draws crowds.
yeah, and it's easy to understand why.
Yeah. Talk about an upcoming project or activity that you're focused on that is firing you up. What is next on the radar? Is there another book coming? Talk about what you're excited about right now.
Yeah, so there's two things. There is a book that's in the process. I'm sure Brian from Codebreakers, like, you keep talking about it, like, get it done. I'm trying, I really am. So there is that. But there's also this thing. It's really just kind of in the conceptual at this point. But it's like what I was talking about earlier. It's how do we bring this knowledge and understanding of these hidden histories to light. We talk a lot about culturally responsive teaching, and it's not just about race. It's culture. It's these experiences that people bring to their spaces. So how can we really talk about that? So I was like, what if we did like CRT, like culturally responsive television? Tim, if somebody comes up with that, if I find out, but this is something I really want to launch, because I just think, we as educators love these platforms. We are in these platforms. but the people that we work with a lot of times are not necessarily sitting in Twitter or, on StreamYard. So it's like, how do we get it out to the masses to say, like, this is what you need to understand and to help us do this work? So Netflix, if you're watching, or now there's so many streaming, I'm open. I'm not loyal to a service.
Hey, want to welcome the beautiful Christine Cavey to the conversation here as I get tongue-tied. Allyship across spaces. I like that. Open dialogue to gain dual perspective. Some gems there. And
Well,
I know
Tim, I'm
Brian...
sure she's happy that you make her tongue-tied.
Every day. And Brian Carpenter, actually, he I know from his story some similar resonance with what you're talking about there as well. And well, thank you, Brian. That is very kind. Charles, this has been a blast. How can we connect with you and join your learning journey? What are the best places?
Yeah, all over. Twitter's probably the best spot. Just hit me up, follow me. If you follow me, I will definitely follow you back. And feel free to message me, connect with me through there. I've got the podcast. There's Facebook groups for the podcast, for Inside the Principal's Office. Connect on that show first and third Saturday of every month, or just find the website. So I am all over. I really am. I used to get upset. I used to joke, I should say, with my students because they're like, I'm going to Google you. I'm like, go ahead. I have such a common name. You're never going to find me.
That's right.
That's changing. Like now they're starting to find me, but that's a good thing. So like find me, connect with me. This is something I love to do. I want to pour in, but I also want to learn. So if you have something to give, let me know.
Thank you so much, Charles, for everything you do and everywhere you appear. Listeners, again, tune in to the Counter Narrative Podcast, Inside the Principal's Office, everywhere that Charles can be found. Keep doing that great work, not only for your own community, but for the broader education conversation, Charles. It is a pleasure to know you and to tune in today. So thank you for sharing some of your Saturday with us. And for those watching, hey, take care, share an encouraging message to lift up a colleague, and keep that fire for learning burning bright. Bye-bye.